Aren't they wonderful? And gave us a taste of what we're not used to. Now, if I could get this, there we go, that's better. Okay, while we set up for lunch, we have a slideshow from a couple from St. Malachi Church. They are Ava and Francesco Zampetti. Their slideshow is also about St. Martin de Porres. They went down to Peru for vacation, but at the time, they went to visit the monastery where St. Martin de Porres lived and did his medical practice. And they have brought to us a slideshow to share while we're setting up for lunch. Directly after the slideshow, I'm going to ask either Monsignor Brito or Father Okonski over there, who are talking and not paying me any attention. If one of them would come up and bless the food so that then we can start after Ava and Francesco are finished. And then after lunch, just so that we have a little time to burn off our food, we do before we can go to Mass. After lunch, we're going to have another representation of where St. Martin de Porres' heritage, because St. Martin de Porres' mother was African. And so we have some African drummers coming after lunch so that you can experience that side of his family as well. And then we'll go over to the upper church to have Mass. Amen?
Amen. Hi everyone, good morning. As Stacy said, I'm Ava Marie Zampetti, and my husband Francesco Zampetti, and I'd like to talk a little bit about St. Martin de Porres, even though he's not showing right now. The reason why we are talking about St. Martin de Porres is that I met St. Martin de Porres, my God-given moment, St. Martin de Porres. Now here is, I'm from Trinidad, and this is my church in San Randy. It's St. Francis Roman Catholic Church. And this is my mom. And the same with St. Francis. I grew up with St. Francis. However, when I was about 11, in Trinidad, there was this important examination called the Common Entrance. And that exam determined the rest of your life. You had to pass this exam. My neighbor was going to church, and she said to me, I'm going to pray for my daughter to pass the exam. And I said, I am coming with you. I need to pass this exam. I didn't only need to pass the exam, I need to pass it really high. Because I needed to win a scholarship. I needed to make sure I topped the island to get a scholarship to represent St. Francis School. I needed every bit of help. I didn't know anything about St. Martin de Porres, but she said there's a novena and it will help. And I asked my mom, and I went to St. Martin de Porres novena. And when there was a statue of St. Martin de Porres, I went to front and I said, St. Martin de Porres, pray for me, intervene for me. And he did. I passed the exam, I got the scholarship, and since then I knew St. Martin de Porres would intervene for me. That was the fate of a child. My second meeting with St. Martin de Porres was accidentally. We were supposed to go on our 25th wedding anniversary to Machu Picchu and Iguazu, the waterfall. And there was a hurricane coming, and the company said, we are bringing you all early into Peru. So we were in Peru, in Lima, early, and they took us on a tour of Lima, and they gave us a free day. And I'm thinking, okay, everybody said they'd walk around, they'd do this, etc. And I don't know what happened. I was looking around, and I saw in a book, it was a shrine, the birthplace of St. Martin de Porres. And all of a sudden, I remember this saint. I said, I have to go there. I have to go there. So I went and asked how to get there, and they gave us directions. So we went there, and we went to St. Martin de Porres. And there was a guide. The guide was a young lady, and she talked about St. Martin de Porres. St. Martin de Porres was known for, they call it bilocation. He was able, they said, to appear in different places at the same time. So you would see this statue, this photo, when he went to Peru. And the next photo, you see, he's seen about the pole. Francisco, next 30, please. Next slide, please. This was in his room. They brought you into his room as a small room, very small. I could do it like this, and only had a bed. But there was this poster on the wall. It said, "Oh Señor mío, cuando comprendo que son hermanos y que deben de amarse los unos a los otros." I hope I'm not slaughtering my Spanish here. Yes. And when you translate it, it said, "Oh my Lord, when will they understand that they are brothers and must love one another?" And that, of course, touched me deeply. The next piece is his ministry of healing. When you go to the shrine near his room, because as Brother said very clearly, he was on the ground floor so that the poor could come to him on this side. There was a closet like a cupboard, all the bottles that he used to make his lotions to heal. And there was a mortar and pestle. Now, I was a pharmacist for 20 years in my country. And when I saw this, I said, "Oh my God, he was a pharmacist just like me." Maybe he led me to pharmacy because I didn't have any idea. The only reason I thought I did pharmacy was a friend told me, "Do it." I really had no vocation. And when I saw that, I felt how I turned the mortar and pestle, because in third world countries we don't have all the machines that you have. We turned manually the mortar and pestle to get the ointments for the skin. That's part of the work I did for my time as pharmacy. So suddenly I felt so much connected with St. Martin de Porres from my exam, and now this. I could give a picture of the exact cover and this from Huddersfield General Hospital Pharmacy. And I said, "Oh my gosh, the Lord had to send me there because of all the things that happened to get us to Peru." Right, so next slide, please. The tour guide was Quechua, never pronounced it. That's one of the native people. And she was telling me that the reason why he took so long to be colonized was because of the racism and the fact he was born under the blanket or whatever at the time. And even though St. Rose de Lima was around the same time, they were both Dominicans. St. Rose de Lima is one of the patron saints from Peru too. St. Rose de Lima died in 1617, and she was canonized in 1671. She was canonized, it took 54 years for her to become a saint. St. Martin de Porres died in 1639. I need to come back there. Right. He was canonized in 1962. He took 323 years after his death before he became a saint. Saints in waiting. And God was right. It was the people who rose up and talked about all of what he had done that pushed the Dominican brothers and order to make sure that he became a saint. So I like this saying, was racism delayed recognition, not holiness. Not because he wasn't holy, he was very holy. But it was racism that delayed his recognition. Next slide, girl, please. So, for me, St. Martin is a brother in struggle. Faith admits inequality and justice. His experiences are not strange. It's the same experiences those of us who are in the struggle today. Whether we are in corporate America and we are fighting for promotion and everybody else gets promoted above us, it's the same struggle. It has hardly changed. Yes. And still we are called to love God and our neighbor in every circumstance. So St. Martin de Porres is a saint for us still today. Next one. This is my kitchen cupboard. And on the side, I have a statue of St. Martin de Porres. And I have a statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe. It sits on my kitchen cupboard. It reminds me to pray in moments when I feel it gets too much. It's right there in the kitchen. It reminds me when I can't even think of what I'm going to cook. As a pharmacist, I'm supposed to be a good cook, which I'm not. It reminds me, and reminds me all the time that holiness is found in humbler service in daily life. Next one now. So, further reflections, he's a saint for our time, a patron of the poor, the sick, and victims of racism. Teaches humility, healing, and inclusive love, a faith that acts through compassion and justice, and pray for healing in our heart, justice in our world, and love without boundaries. And because of my encounters with St. Martin de Porres, I feel called to service. And one of the ways I do it is to be a member of St. Malachi's anti-racism ministry. We have a ministry of anti-racism at St. Malachi's, and I see Angie there, I see Robert there, I see Naomi there. So I feel committed to continue that work, the patron saint of St. Martin de Porres. And St. Malachi's is a special place to be. I'm not saying other churches are not, but St. Malachi's is a special place to be too, because the patron saint for St. Malachi, his feast day is also November the 3rd, and St. Martin de Porres also November the 3rd, and St. Malachi has them both side by side. That's a picture from St. Malachi's. So thank you for sharing, for taking the time to listen to my sharing of my encounters with St. Malachi.
You could hold that, sweetheart. You could hold that for me. Okay, so my talk was actually originally done for architecture for my work group. So it begins with our 25th wedding anniversary, as my wife said, and we went to Lima early. The two of us, when we travel, we do. I like the ancient ruins, and so we put that into our travels together. And she, of course, loves waterfalls. This is Azuzu Falls. By the way, if you haven't seen the movie The Mission, especially in the context of Native American History Month, the indigenous people, it's a very good story about the Guadni folks, and so this is the waterfalls of which that happens. First of all, I want to shout out to the founder of the architecture firm I work for. I'm an architect. He encouraged all of us to do shows like this. This is the first show I did for my company, and so he passed away earlier this year or last year, and so I wanted to honor him here. I was very grateful that I got a chance to show him before he passed away when we went to Great Zimbabwe. That's our bucket list for Africa. Machu Picchu was our bucket list for South America. So we got a chance to show him that special place. So this talk was originally about the Inca and the Inca Empire and the Peru and the subsequent Spanish conquest architecturally. And so I had, images of ruins, as well as, various places of the Inca built, the Quechua people built, and it had a kind of an architectural theme to it, of course, Machu Picchu. I showed this to Stacy, and she said, well, can you put this something for St. Martin de Porres? And here's the thing, I ended the architectural talk with St. Martin de Porres, and I'm going to explain to you why. So I have obviously boiled it down so that we can eat lunch on time. But this is the cathedral in Lima. This is the Franciscan Cathedral in Lima. And also this is a Franciscan monastery. This is the entrance to the Dominican monastery. Our tour was going to take us to the Franciscans, but that day we had free. We went into Lima, and we got a tour of the Dominican, independent of the rest of the tour. That's St. Dominic on the far, I guess, the left, and then the three saints: St. Martin de Porres, St. Rosa Lima, and St. Jose Martin.
De Porres or something like that.
Yes, sorry, I should have memorized that. I was supposed to say that. This is our lovely guide. She took us around the Dominican Priory and the complex, and I just showed you some images of the space, the church, the shrines. And this is actually, I think, St. Martin's in here somewhere. This is so I'm going to get through those quickly. Us architects like all this stuff, so this is us. There you go. So he also gave us a tour of St. Martin de Porres. Yeah.
There was a movie done on St. Martin de Porres, and the name of it is in Spanish, and it was Mulatto Llamo.
Un mulato llamado Martin, a mulatto named Martin.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Yes, so I was hoping that someday we can at least be able to show it at St. Malpis or Aunt Teresa's group. Yeah, but it's in Spanish. I haven't been able to find an English
There's an
version.
update one that's a different, update one that EWTN did called EWTN Martin de Porres.
Oh.
It's done in the whole with modern cinema photography. Much better.
Okay, good.
Can we go on that website and see it on
EWTN Martin de Porres.
Okay.
But here's the good news. Nowadays you can download it on Yahoo for free. On YouTube, excuse me, YouTube for free.
I saw it on EWTN, and I'm from St. Martin de Porres Parish.
Oh,
Okay.
And I saw it 2 years ago on EWTN.
Okay.
And ever since then, I constantly go ahead to look to see what they're going to be showing, what kind of talks they're going to have, because it helps me to grow and sustain. So when I saw, and you're right, it made me look at St. Martin de Porres different. To me, because in our parish, he's just a green statue. Because I realized they didn't want him to be black, so they did it green. So when I see St. Martin de Porres every day, he's green. Now when I see St. Martin de Porres, he looks like Jesus and me.
okay. Yeah. So we're gonna get that. We definitely gonna get that movie.
Yeah, you can go, I was telling her, you can go in and get it, because they, it's our copies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So when I do these talks for my firm, I called it impressions, because I would get a lot of the information that I shared by listening to the tour guides. This is the young. She wanted to get a picture of us together, and then of course we got a picture as well. This is our tour guide in Lima, and the group is called, the tour company was Friendly Planet. She took us around the museums around Lima, Peru, and then this is where a lot of the artifacts are kept. She also took us to the Franciscan shrine, Franciscan monastery. Correct me, please, if I get the words wrong. but this is where the Franciscans are across the way. This is Robbie. He's our guide in Cusco. Cusco is the center of the Inca Empire, and he is also a mixed indigenous Quechua and Spanish. This is the cathedral in Cusco, and this is one of the museums he took us. This is our group we were on tour with. He took us up to the mountain on top of Cusco. There's, of course, like in Peru. In Brazil, it's Jesus up there. So this is the square in central Cusco. But I want to start this conversation about the Quechua people. I have some images of them and their traditional costumes and not costumes, but dress, and just very colorful. So the Quechua people are they lived in the mountains, and they took this poisonous tuber, and over hundreds and hundreds of years, they made it edible. They're the people who cultivated the potato, and this would change the world because potatoes it was these people. They also had maize from Central America, from the Aztec, the Mohihe, and the Mayan, because they traded with them. They have guinea pigs, which they would eat. You saw Robbie holding one cooked. They also had llamas and alpacas. The Inca were a clan of the Quechua that came to power. So we often call the Inca, but it's the Quechua people. The Inca are a clan. They're like the royal family. And they became the royal family because they seized power, they consolidated, they organized the empire that would be the Inca Empire. At the core of it was agriculture and terrace farming, but it was a vast empire, and there's just some examples of their craftsmanship from the museums. Pottery that they did, gold work that they did. This is the center, the spiritual center of the Quechua and the Inca. The Temple of the Sun in Cusco. These are images of that. There's what the complex would have looked like. It was covered with gold. These are just images from it. Like that was probably something filled with gold. Of course, the gold has been hauled off by the Spanish. Robbie would say he hopes that some of it's still in the basement of the Spanish monarch. They were people who observed the stars avidly and followed the constellations. This is a crude drawing done by a chronicler, the Spanish chronicler, describing this great golden tablet. Now, obviously, this is crude because it was done by a crude drawing. I just want to give you examples of the quality of the Inca and the Quechua goldsmiths. These are very capable people. That would have been a very beautiful piece of sculpture in gold. But as you know, that's just context. The spirituality, I'm not going to say of the Inca, but it's really the Quechua, and even in the Americas, the Native Americans, is this idea of duality. Everything's in juxtaposition. You have this Temple of the Sun in the valley, so on the mountain you have the Temple of the Moon, and so that there's this kind of duality. So up on the mountain to see this, it sounds like sexy woman. Sexy woman is the name of the place. It's a temple. It's a spiritual center for the moon, but also thunder. And you see it in the shape of a lightning strike in plan. Probably something in gold was there too. This was at a sacred space. Just to give you a context, this is probably a place that was worshipped, or where people communed with nature and the divine for thousands and thousands of years, long before even the potato was cultivated. So this is this place here. Pictures of that. This is in the Sacred Valley. This is a gate that the Inca built. For the people, for the Inca, Quechua, religion and agricultural research were one and the same. This is actually, I would call this place is like an agricultural research center, because they were constantly tinkering with the plants and the animals to perfect the right agricultural mix, the right things that grow at various places. So this is also for them that the university and religion were one and the same. So I think it's a research center. It's also a spiritual center for the Inca Quechua people. Just I'm an architect. Sorry, a lot of pictures. The sacredness of water and all of that. So, okay. So the Cusco is in the brown there. Cusco is the center of the Inca Empire. It conquers the coastline and then conquers north and south. It's one of the largest empires in the world at the time. This is one of the cities on the coast that was conquered. This is their spirituality. They were a fishing culture on the coast. Wonderful fish off the coast of Peru. Pottery, just examples of the Pan-Inca Empire, another city that was on the coast. And this is another tour guide who gave us a tour of that city. Sacred Valley, back in the inland, interior. Sacred Valley is where we're going to end this. It's a river that flows into the Amazon, even though it's very close to the Pacific, flows into the Atlantic. So this is another example of Inca technology. They use sulfuric acid as their mortar. That's why those joints are so tight. Learned that when we were there. Just some other examples. And this is a granary. They keep the potatoes and other crops high up in the dry mountains. So the Inca, they knew about the equator. And if you were at the equator, you would recognize that it is the equal distance the sun goes up from winter solstice to summer solstice. But like any kind of understanding, as soon as a general and a prince gets a hold of it, you get a civil war. So the Inca were in the middle of a civil war at the time. They were already hearing about what was happening in the Valley of Mexico, what the Spanish were doing to the Aztecs. They knew about it, but they were preoccupied with their civil war, which made them vulnerable, that and smallpox. So the conflict, because the spiritual center was, of course, Cusco, so the people, the priests want to get the spiritual center. It was kind of their counter-reformation. So they built Machu Picchu as an attempt to recenter the religion between these four mountains, the cardinal points, in the midst of this civil war. Just notice that curved building. I'm going to come back to that a little bit, and that's where I'm going to tie it in. So Machu Picchu, just some images of Machu Picchu. So this city was built at about that time. There's that building again. But this is the place where they would make sacrifices at the summer and winter and the equinoxes. The 4 times a year they would make sacrifices here. And I'm going to circle back to what they would do with the sacrifices. Just more images of the complex. So when Pizarro shows up, the Spanish didn't take over right away. Pizarro married an Inca princess. Yes, they had the battles. Yes, they had smallpox. But there was more of it was not a direct takeover. The Spanish didn't have the power to do that. But slowly over time, they did. And in the context of that, there was also the people, the Quechua, the mountains were sacred to them. They were sacred shapes to them. And so when Christianity arrives, the Christian missionaries began to portray Mary and the saints in this kind of mountain shape to connect to the spirituality of the people. The other thing is that the Quechua and the Inca, they were worshipped outside. Their sacred spaces were outside. And so the procession became very important to them. And we were there because we saw so many of them. because it was this is a way of connecting Catholic spirituality with the spirituality of the people that were there. So this is a procession in Cusco. Images of that procession, very colorful, very vibrant, very alive. So the idea also of the sun and the moon, gold and silver, were very much a part of their spiritual sensibility. And so you have in the altars the use of gold and silver. You see that in these examples here, gold and silver, gold and silver. So, but anyway, the Spanish eventually do seize power. They tear down the temple of the sun, they build a monastery over top of it. This is the monastery. They build over the sacred sites. They begin this is a Spanish villa that was built over the Inca ruin, the Inca's foundation. But you still see remnants of the Inca people, of the Quechua building, earthquake-proof buildings, by the way. Some more examples of the cathedrals. But also the political center for Peru began to move to the coastline, where the Spanish had more consolidated power. And so power moves to Lima, the center of the country moves to Lima. And this caste system, this racial caste system begins to emerge. Europeans born in Spain, Spanish born in Spain, Spanish born there, and then people of mixed race. So there's this kind of tyranny that begins to arise even in the spirituality, even in the religion. However, the Jesuits, they said, no, we're going to let the people have some expression of their artistic. So this is a church just south of Cusco, and you can see the indigenous colors, the people representing, if you saw the dress, you can see this is their church, this is their way of expressing themselves in their architecture. So I included that here. I'm going to get to it. So Cusco, it is a lot of earthquakes. It's the Ring of Fire. And there was a lot of serious earthquakes. The Inca knew how to build in earthquake zones. The monastery that you see here was actually destroyed by an earthquake, and it was then turned into a museum, and then they moved the monastery next door, and they made this a museum to both the monastery, but also to the Temple of the Sun. But you see how the Inca would build with interlocking blocks to prevent their buildings from collapsing in earthquakes. And so that's why the Inca... But anyway, during a big earthquake in Cusco, there was constant tremors and earthquakes, and they started processing all these saints, these European saints. But finally, when they processed the Black Jesus, the quake stopped. And the Black Jesus was kind of off in the corner. It was something that was sacred to the Quechua, but maybe not to the rulers. But then the Black Jesus, because of this miracle, becomes elevated within the church, and it becomes part of... And here's where I'm going to make my connection to all of this. The Quechua, the Inca would sacrifice on the four times a year. They would sacrifice, 3 times a year, they would sacrifice members of their own family at the equinoxes and at the summer solstice. But in the winter solstice, they would have a very special sacrifice. So that was the most, like the sun had to come back, to get the sun to come back. They would sacrifice a black llama. And it would be sacrificed here, as well as other places. And I didn't have any pictures of black llamas, but I thought they were rare. But then I realized there it was, in the cosmos. The negative space was the black llama. So for them, this idea of the black llama was a spiritual connection with the sun, with the stars. So with now the Black Jesus was, in a sense, blackness was a kind of, it had a sacred role for the people. And the Black Jesus becomes the new Black Llama, the new sacrifice to replace the traditional. So now people are connecting it. And that's why you see these images of the Black Jesus throughout Peru. So St. Martin de Porres comes along. Jesus sacrifices his life for us. St. Martin also, in a way, sacrifices himself. He sacrifices he is unlike the world. He is giving and sharing. He's Christ-like. So he sacrifices pride and egotism and narcissism that all of us are tempted into. And it rejects the worldly power and influence. And he lives this sacred life of humility. And for the sensibility of the indigenous, of the people there, this made sense. This is the Black Lama again. This is this sacrifice again, once again coming back into, although even in the Franciscan church, they went before us. So we went to the shrine there. These are images of that shrine from there. And of course, his humility allowed him to be present to the poor, but also listen. He listened to his mother, who was an African woman, who would have brought the medicinal sensibilities from Africa into his consciousness. He listened to the indigenous people, and so this is his bed, his actual bed that he lived in. This is our tour guide again. This is the room he lived in. They actually have a replica of the bed now. But they also had his pharmacy. And this kind of merging of listening to people and hearing, he made cures for folks and he healed folks with the medicines. And the medicines were only capable because he was able to listen to the others by being humble and not being full of himself. So, like the rest of us. And my wife, by the way, she mentioned was a pharmacist, so this was a big moment for her. Anyway, this is the basket they would carry food for the poor in. And it's obviously 400 years old, or 300 years old, maybe that. This is where his body was originally kept. His remains were kept originally, but once he was made a saint, they put him in the altar to his name, in his chapel to his name, and by Pope John 23rd, made him a saint, being made in 1962. Also, there's these paintings of these miraculous cures that are attributed to him, and he took care of even the small creatures in the priory. One of the prayers, and of course that's where we're going to end. He becomes the Black Lama in the sky again. So, with that, thank you all.
Thank you, Oliver Francesco, for sharing that with us. And I know that you all know